Today, my guest is author James Bradley. We will be talking with him about his new paperback release from Back Bay Books, Little Brown Publishers, named The Imperial Cruise, A Secret History of Empire and War. The hardcover came out in November 2009 to good reviews. Now, James is the author of two World War II history books, Flags of Our Fathers and Flyboys, and is also the president of the James Bradley Peace Foundation. He lives in New York with his wife and children. James, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jacqueline, thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm really excited to talk to you about this book. But the first thing that I want to ask you, James, tell us what the James Bradley Peace Foundation is all about.
Well, my dad was one of the guys who raised the flag on Iwo Jima, and he cried in his sleep for the first 4 years he came back.
Oh.
Suffered from the images of horror he saw on Iwo Jima. Later, I went to school in Japan. That changed my life. And then when I realized I'd be writing about the mayhem between Asia and America, I wondered what I could do about it. So for the last 11 years, we've been sending American high school kids to Japan and China for 1 year of study. They live with Japanese and Chinese families.
That's wonderful. How are these kids selected?
They go to jamesbradley.com and download the application and get it started. We just chose two kids yesterday to go to Japan.
Oh, that's fantastic. What a wonderful idea, and good for you for doing that. Well, let's talk about your work. Now, your first two books and now your current one are about well-kept secrets. Now, when you wrote Flag of Our Fathers, did you set out to revise history, or was it something you discovered while researching that story?
Well, my father was one of the guys who raised the flag on
Yes.
Iwo Jima, but that's all we knew. We knew he was in the photo, but he wouldn't talk about it. After he died, we found boxes of memories that he had kept, and it started me on I didn't set out to write a book. I set out to find why my dad didn't talk about Iwo Jima.
Mm-hmm.
And the phone calls I made the information was so surprising, I thought I'd better get it out in a book.
That's amazing. So did you find most of the information then about what did happen there through the papers of your father, or did that evolve from additional research that you did?
Oh, a lot, about 4 years of research. I phoned all of the families of the guys who had raised the flag. They had never been contacted, in a circle like that before. They talked to me because I was seen as an insider, a family member.
Yes.
And then I talked to my dad's buddies who fought with him on Iwo Jima, and the story that, in other words, what my mother was married to my dad for 47 years. In that marriage, he said the words Iwo Jima once to her.
That's something, isn't it?
So what she found out about Iwo Jima, she learned in my book.
That's wonderful. Well, it was quite a book, and then you discovered secrets too in Flyboys, which also included George Bush Sr. So it seems to me that those two books did get you going on asking questions, and hence this book. This is an amazing story, and would you give an overview of it and your thesis? And before you start, I want to emphasize again that this is as well a true story.
Yes, I really don't, think there's a thesis here. There's 45 pages of notes, and the Imperial Cruise, in 1905, Theodore Roosevelt dispatched the largest diplomatic delegation to Asia in U.S. history, something like Obama's current trip, and they went from San Francisco to Hawaii, Japan, Philippines, China, Korea, and back. And Roosevelt secretly did a number of disastrous diplomatic deals. One of them was a secret treaty that he unconstitutionally agreed with Japan that encouraged Japan to expand into Asia. In other words, the problem that Franklin Delano Roosevelt later had in the Pacific was Japanese expansionism in Asia.
Right.
That expansionism was approved and cheerleaded and agreed to by Theodore Roosevelt in the summer of 1905 on this Imperial Cruise.
Well, that's an astounding fact, and of course you've already covered the significance of that, and it was the largest mission to that region in American history up until that time. And what was interesting to me is that he sent his daughter Alice. So what was the significance of his including his daughter Alice on this so-called diplomatic trip?
Well, Alice was the Jackie Kennedy of her day. She was the most famous woman in the world at that point, and the press was gaga over her. So Roosevelt couldn't leave the country and go on the cruise himself. Presidents did not leave the country back then while they were in office. So he was going to, they were going to Asia, and she was perceived as a princess. She was called Princess Alice.
She was gorgeous, too. You've got some great pictures in this book.
Yeah, she was a cutie.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was the mistress of the trip. Also, it was to distract the press. They focused on Alice while Roosevelt's Secretary of War, William Howard Taft, was doing secret deals behind the scenes.
That's really a media coup, then, wasn't it? I mean, did not the press ever question anything about it, or were they so enamored with Alice that did take all of their attention?
Well, there was nothing to question because Taft, Secretary of War Taft in Tokyo, got up early one morning, secretly went to a palace, went into an unadorned room, and the Prime Minister of Japan walked in with a translator, and between them, Taft spoke for Roosevelt, and they agreed that the Japanese military would take Korea. Now, Theodore Roosevelt, a couple months later, hands over the keys to the American embassy in downtown Seoul.
My goodness.
To the Japanese military so they can go civilize Asia. That was what we later called World War II in the Pacific.
So his whole reasoning was to civilize Asia?
Yes, we had civilized the West by exterminating most of the Indians and putting them in reservations. And, you have to go back to 1905. The British had India, the Germans had Namibia. The white powers were spreading around the world.
True.
North China, which was called Manchuria at the time, was very valuable, and Roosevelt wanted America to be represented there, but Congress wouldn't give him the funds. So he saw the Japanese army as a rent-a army. And the Japanese said to him, we are embracing American values, Mr. Roosevelt. Look at us. We wear Brooks Brothers suits, and those Chinese are still wearing dresses. We will represent American interests in northern China. So Theodore Roosevelt agreed that the Japanese military could go in there. That was the problem my dad went to Iwo Jima to solve.
My goodness. So that's how he encouraged the Japanese imperialism, setting the stage for Pearl Harbor.
Well, again, yes, that's true. And, the listener has to understand that Roosevelt thought he was doing a wonderful thing. He thought he was doing a progressive thing by allowing the Japanese to be the first non-white country to help with the white man's burden, lifting those poor Chinese, up into a civilized mode.
Well, it's very hard, isn't it, for the average person to put themselves back in history to try to understand what was going on during the period. And as you mentioned, at that point, his ideas, his racial ideas, Teddy Roosevelt was complex, and most people then did consider whites to be superior. And in 1904, you mentioned the St. Louis World's Fair, which embodied the racist attitudes. Could you talk about those two little points a bit so that people can understand that setting and understand the racism that existed?
Well, it was racial theory, and to get out of any Ivy League school, Roosevelt went to Harvard and Columbia, Taft went to Yale, you learn that that the white man had come from the Caucasus Mountains, gone to Germany, became the Teuton, went to England, became the Anglo-Saxon, and then became the American. And again, Harvard taught you that was truth. And so it wasn't Roosevelt's ideas, it was any educated American thought this way. Mm-hmm. And in looking back, we would view this as racist, but in 1905, you couldn't argue the case. You
right.
just looked at a world map, and the whites were taking over the world. The non-white races were succumbing to the whites, so the whites said that's proof that we're superior.
Sure.
And that's the way it was. It wasn't just Roosevelt. His entire cabinet, the world, all the
yes.
staff of the New York Times.
Mm-hmm.
So he projected those ideas over to Asia, and he thought that he could screw around with the chessboard there in Asia, but it ended disastrously.
Yes. This is the Jacqueline Bachar Show, and I want to mention that I am talking to those of you just tuning in to author James Bradley about his new history paperback release from Back Bay Books, Little Brown Publishers, named The Imperial Cruise, A Secret History of Empire and War. It's a fascinating story. Talk some more about, because I think the next question that we need to cover is how that mission, if you can elaborate on what you've already said, how that mission set the stage for World War II, the Chinese Communist Revolution, and the Korean War. That's quite an amazing partnership.
Well, Roosevelt was an amazing guy, and he was an extremely powerful president. Roosevelt looked at Asia through his racial theories, and the theory was that China was collapsing like an old barn. So you've got 400 million people, and Roosevelt said, American foreign policy under Roosevelt said China is going to have nothing to do with the future of Asia. So if you just stop right there, that's a huge miscalculation.
Yes, when you think about where it is now in particular.
Yeah, and if you think of all the treaties and talking and dealings with other countries, that's based on Roosevelt's idea that China is just going to sink. They're going to fall apart. They're going to shatter like a dropped bottle of beer. And so other countries were going to move in to pick up the slack. The potent countries, as he said, because China was impotent, the potent countries were England, America, and Japan. And those three countries holding hands were going to march into China and pick up the pieces and split China up and quote-unquote civilize China. So he authorized the Japanese to go into China. That's the military expansion that caused 30 million Chinese died as a result of the Japanese expansion. This is no little thing. Roosevelt said to the Japanese, you should have Korea. He said it many times. And that resulted in the Koreans being taken over by the Japanese for 45 years.
So he considered Japan, obviously, even though it was an Asian country, he considered Japan, from what I hear you saying, to be superior to the Philippines, China, and Korea. He saw something that he felt was superior, and that's why he gave them the okay. Is that right?
Yes, but almost all America saw Japan as superior. They were our close buddy out in Asia because Japan was the only Asian country that emulated us. They were the only ones to build railroads, put up telegraph lines, wear pants, ties.
Well, I'm going to have to interrupt you here, James. Please remember what you're going to say. We'll be right back. I'm talking to James Bradley. This is Jacqueline Bachar Show. James, before we went to the break, you were saying something very important that I would like you to continue with.
Well, the question is, why would Theodore Roosevelt judge Japan as the civilized country to civilize Asia? And you can see in the book that the Japanese understood that Roosevelt saw Asia through his racial theories that he had learned in Columbia and Harvard.
Right.
And they came to him and they said, hey, Mr. Roosevelt, your race, the white race, started on the side of the Himalayas, and then went west to England and jumped to America. The Asians started on the other side of the Himalayas, and just as Britain is the greatest exponent of the white race off the coast of England, we, Japan, are off the coast of Asia, and we're different than Asia. We're not like those Asians. We have railroads, telegraph lines, Brooks Brothers suits, and we're assimilating American culture, and we're the best of Asia, and we can bring that American culture into Asia. And Roosevelt, with his cockamamie theories, he didn't ask the State Department, he didn't consult his ambassadors, he didn't tell anybody. This was all unconstitutional. Said, yeah, this makes sense. Believed that he was doing a great good by greenlighting Japan's expansion into Asia. That was later called World War II.
It sure was. Now, pardon me, James, why then was this erased from the textbooks and kept secret until after Teddy's death? And why did it take this long for it to come out?
The secret treaty, he got into his grave with no one even knowing that meeting took place.
Oh, my. And Alice never spoke of it? Well, she didn't know what was going on, did she?
No, she had no idea.
Right.
No one did. This was illegal. And, there was a Yale jurist by the name of William Howard Taft who was the one doing it.
Oh,
so
boy.
He obfuscated it. He knew it was unconstitutional. So you had Roosevelt's lawyer, William Howard Taft, was the one doing it. And they obscured everything. And then years later, when it came out very vaguely. They erased names at first, and then it was distanced as something, way out there in the Pacific. And as the New York Times said, I don't reveal anything that no one else could find, but the crime scene was all discombobulated. It's as if they identified a bloody knife. But that's all they identified. They didn't tell you that near the knife was a dead body,
Yeah. Well, let's get into some more specifics about that, because I'd like to hear more of what you did find when exactly 100 years later, you retraced the route of the Imperial Cruise to Hawaii, the Philippines, China, Japan, and Korea. So what did you find specifically, and how did you find it, and to whom did you speak?
Well, I went, for example, I stood everywhere they stood in the Philippines. I went all over Japan, China. I'll give you one little surprise.
Could you speak a little louder, James, please?
Okay, I'll give you one little surprise. So I go to China, and I discover the name Franklin Delano Roosevelt. To those listeners who've read a number of books about him, I go to China and stumble on the fact that Franklin Delano Roosevelt had his whole life supported by his grandfather's fortune, and it wasn't Roosevelt money, it was Delano money. His grandfather had been the opium king of China.
Oh, no, the opium king of China?
I had no idea that Cabot House in Harvard, that's opium money.
Oh, my goodness. No, that was never publicized anywhere. And you found this. How did you find that?
Just by reading about 400 books and looking at some obscure documents. Warren Delano, the grandfather of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, euphemized his activities. So it took a while, but I nailed it.
Now, did you actually visit at parts of Hawaii, the Philippines, China, Japan, and Korea?
Yes, ma'am.
As part of it.
I went everywhere they went.
You physically went there. So that's the point that I want to make, that this information that you've gathered, certainly you used written material, printed material that you found, but you did physically retrace the route, and that's very important. That this is what you did. How long did it take you, by the way?
Well, I flew. I didn't sail like
no,
that.
Right? But I mean, how long did it take you to do the research? And
well, just the trip was about a month, but the book took me 6 years.
I believe it. That's a long time. Now, when the hardcover came out, and I would also like to have you mention for the listeners your website, James, and they can find more information on it. Would you mention that first?
JamesBradley.com.
Now, when the book came out, you mentioned that you had some comments from New York Times. Did you get any negative response from anyone or any other countries or political figures or government people? Or
The only negative response I've gotten is from some people who don't want to read the book because of their preconceptions. But no, the New York Times said that I'm bringing out facts that other biographers are ignoring.
Right.
The New York Times challenged Roosevelt biographers to come forward and answer why they haven't let the public know these facts. They haven't come forward. Foreign countries, Korea is head over heels with the book. They've produced it in Korean. China's working on a Chinese copy. So it's out there.
So they love it. And of course, let's face it, this does not paint a pretty picture of America. And so I am sure that there are aspects of these various countries that you've mentioned that are delighted to show just how terrible we can be and how all of this is our former president's fault.
Well, the way I look at it, I went to Iwo Jima and I wrote down what I found. Mm-hmm. In other words, if I had found that my father had another family by another woman, I would have put it in the book.
Right.
But I put down the facts that I found. With the Imperial Cruise, I found the facts, and I don't mean really to criticize Theodore Roosevelt or America, but my shock wasn't so much American behavior. My shock was that I got a degree in history and was never told these facts.
Right. And but I suppose in history there are many aspects of history that one could research and find deliberate errors of omission or revisionist paperwork. And again, I suppose it all relates to the period and what's considered important and how people lived and that sort of thing. But I agree with you. I mean, this is too important to not cover, and it is surprising to me that no one brought this out before. Very quickly, I would like to talk about the fact it was kind of, I don't know if interesting is the right word. I guess I was a little shocked and amazed to read that waterboarding actually existed in the Philippines, but how the acceptance of waterboarding has changed over time from the Philippines to World War II, Japan to the modern war on terror. And I don't think the average American knows that at one time it was acceptable. Can you just briefly talk about that?
Waterboarding was such a standard operating procedure in the Philippines that troops marched to the waterboarding song that I reproduced in the book. They marched to singing about the joys of waterboarding.
The joys of waterboarding.
And as you see, Life magazine put an example of waterboarding on their cover in 1902 off the top of my head.
Uh-huh.
And but what I found interesting was I had first known about waterboarding before we did it in Iraq in World War II. When the Japanese waterboarded American pilots, mm-hmm. those Japanese were declared war criminals after the war.
Right.
That was a war crime.
Mm-hmm.
And then, much to my surprise, I go back to the Philippines and find that when we did it, it was accepted behavior. President George W. Bush, in his book that he's on a book tour right now, he was asked about, or in the book, he says his decision to waterboard was, quote, damn right, unquote.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think like anything, that's always going to be controversial, and there's going to be people that are against it, people that said, no, it was okay under the circumstances, and I don't think that those sort of things are ever going to get resolved. But It's an interesting fact. You know, I want to know a little bit more about Alice. I was so taken with what I read in your book about the relationship between Teddy Roosevelt and his daughter Alice. I felt such sorrow for her. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that relationship and why it was so distant and almost painfully abusive.
Oh, my, it's just so sad about Alice.
Yes.
She was a beautiful girl, but a Roosevelt relative said that the relationship with her father twisted her mind.
I believe it.
Alice Roosevelt was the daughter of Theodore Roosevelt and his wife Alice. That wife died in childbirth, and then Theodore Roosevelt remarried to his childhood sweetheart, who was jealous that he had married someone else in the first place. So now Theodore Roosevelt's remarried to a woman who doesn't like the idea that Theodore has a child. And if you can imagine this almost sounds unbelievable, but Theodore Roosevelt, in his long life, in her long life, Theodore Roosevelt never discussed Alice's mother with her.
Never mentioned the name, never was even written anywhere in any of his papers. That's unbelievable.
And she wrote about how much it bothered her and how angry it made her that he never acknowledged that there was a different mother. And then the stepmother wasn't physically abusive, but mentally abusive.
Oh yes, mentally, emotionally, and the children, the other children, the step siblings were quite mean to her as well.
Yes, and on her wedding day, she said in the White House, she said to Theodore Roosevelt's wife, her stepmother, "Oh, Mother, this is the finest wedding anyone could ever have." And her stepmother looked at her and said, "I'm so glad you're leaving. You've been nothing but trouble."
Yes, that gave me a stomach ache. That gave me a physical reaction. Just imagining what that must have been like.
And once again, I think, the surprise to me here was that I got a history degree. I read casually books about Theodore Roosevelt in my younger days, and all of this information has been hidden. And,
yes.
I came across letters of Theodore Roosevelt bound in books, and I saw that there'd be a letter about whippoorwills and trees, and that would be quoted in one of his biographies. And the next letter would be what we would consider a very racist letter, but it was, again, just the way they thought at the time. And in one case, we found those letters cut out of the book up at Yale Library. So there's definitely been a historical cover-up going on, and I'm not the one who first said that. That
right.
was the New York Times.
Yeah, and Teddy Roosevelt's always projected as this man's man and this outdoorsman and this big hero, and it was also surprising to read that his whole image as an outdoorsman was not totally true. Well, you know what? We are out of time, and I can't believe this. And we have to say goodbye, and that will enable people to read your book and find out why Roosevelt's Nobel Peace Prize is more controversial than Barack Obama's. James, thank you so much for being here, and good luck with the book.
Thank you for having me, and you're welcome.